Hi again then guys, and welcome to another individual car review from GT Sport of course, and this time we are returning once again to the world of Vision GTs, a world which always seems strange to me how controversial it has become, because it never seemed that controversial in Gran Turismo 6. People always seem to look forward to them, and we got quite a few of them, whereas now in GT Sport, they've really slowed down. We haven't had a new Vision GT in quite some time, and people always seem to complain about them. There seem to be far more people complaining about them than saying good things about them, which is strange, and of course, the negative people do tend to be louder and more vocal, which is probably why it stands out to me more. I know that many of you guys do love them, I love them myself, and although there are certain Vision GTs that I'm certainly not a fan of, I don't hate any of them. I just think that some of them are downright lazy and utterly pointless from a creative point of view, and then other ones really do take genuine creativity and use it, apply it in a futuristic way to things that maybe will never happen, but it would be cool if they did, like the Chaparral or the Tomahawks, etc. And even some that we are unfortunately never going to get now, like the Bertoni. Now, in the form of this car, this one shares much of its DNA with the much more popular Nissan. The Vision GT, Concept 2020, whatever you want to call it, the 2+2-seater, in effect R36 GTR, which is to some degree what it could become down the line, which from that point of view will be very cool, but I've put my thoughts out there before, and we will review the Nissan again at some point because I just don't like the car. I don't like the Nissan Vision GT in terms of the way it drives. I think it's very overrated given how many people seem to love it for no apparent reason. This Infiniti to me is like the Maserati to the Ferrari that is the Nissan. Everyone gives the Ferrari the attention, Maserati just gets the people who want something a bit different. That's exactly what this Infiniti seems to be like. Even in GT6, a ton of people never bothered to use this car. I was, to be honest, disappointed with it, initially at least, because there's so little that you can do to this car, and some Vision GT cars have actually improved in GT Sport compared to before because you can now tune them to some degree. This unfortunately is not one of those. Now, I'm going to head off the main portion of this review by saying a couple of things that you need to know before everything else about the car. This is not a good handling car under normal circumstances. You have to tune it to get any kind of usefulness out of it. And secondly, if it's not a car which you love the look of more than everything else, don't bother buying it at all. It really is as simple as that, because to me, this is actually my favourite Vision GT car of them all in terms of its visual design. Now, I've said before that I believe the Chaparral is probably my favourite from a technological point of view, but this one is my favourite visual design. I think this is a stunning looking car. And although that's probably a relatively unpopular opinion, especially given that I don't like the look of the Nissan, which is essentially the same car underneath, I just think this has a fantastic looking shape. In black in particular, I've blacked out the chrome as well, as you can see, and to me it's just a great looking car. If I was to design a supercar primarily with just the pleasure of looking at it in mind, it would look something like this. Now, there are a couple of things about it that I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a fan of those stupid sills sticking out below the passenger and driver window. It looks kind of pointless, but apart from that, I love all the rest of the design. Now, in terms of what kind of specs you're looking at, as I said, it is thematically similar to the Nissan. So you've got a 4.5 litre, 535 horsepower, which you cannot increase, and it puts out 375 pound-feet of torque. It's rear-wheel drive, front engine, presumably, I believe, front mid-engine. And in terms of weight, well, it's hefty. It's very hefty. 1,680 kilos is even more than a Mercedes SLR McLaren, which admittedly is a far more useful car in Gran Turismo, and on a slight tangent, I would love it if they brought that one back. Now, as far as this one goes in terms of handling, in terms of driving style, well, as I said very early on in this review, the handling is definitely not for everyone. And the handling is easily the worst thing about the car. Because this is, I'm going to be honest, an awful handling car in its stock form. You have to tune it to get any kind of good handling out of it at all. And even then, it can bite back. Now, in order to get the best out of it, you have to tune the diff very specifically in particular. The rest will kind of take care of itself to some degree, but it's a shame that you can't even do stuff like tuning the gears, for instance. That's a shame, I think. You know, in terms of lap times, in terms of performance, it's certainly not a bad car. I mean, to put it into some perspective, this is a car that weighs more than an SLR McLaren, and it has less power than a GTR, and yet the lap times that it can do here are similar to my fully tuned Subaru 22B, which also has well over 500 horsepower and is a lot lighter than this car. So when you put it in that way and in those terms, that actually doesn't sound bad at all. The Subaru has literally every advantage: more power, less weight, and all-wheel drive. And yet this is still quicker. That's impressive. I mean, let's be honest, that is impressive. But it's not a forgiving car, it's not a beginner-friendly car, it's not a car which cuts you any slack. You have to put the work in, and unfortunately in this replay, you'll notice that there is no cockpit cam. And that's because, unfortunately, there is no cockpit cam. The car doesn't have one. So for those people who like to assume, as you would hope to, that all the cars in the game have a cockpit, they still don't. There are certain Vision GTs that do not. This is one of them. And I think that's a shame, because I'd love to see the interior of this one. And as I've mentioned before, one of the main reasons why it annoys me when these cars don't have an interior is because if you go back to Gran Turismo 6 and look under the Vision GT section, literally every single one of them has an interior picture in the background of the menu. So it's not that they didn't design one, it's just that for whatever reason they didn't bother to put it in the game. That's kind of dumb to me. In fact, it's very dumb if you have the interior and then don't bother to do that. But this car, it's one of the most niched vehicles in the whole game. I absolutely love it. But even I admit, it's a useless car, because not only is it Group X, it's also 1 million credits, and it can barely beat anything. Outside of Group X, within Group X, Vision GTs, there's hardly anything that this car can actually beat. Now, I said it could beat the Subaru, but of course it doesn't matter, because they're not even in the same category. So, for what it is, it's a pure collector's piece. This is the kind of car that you should only buy if you are somewhat of a hipster when it comes to your choice of cars, which I certainly am. I like cars that many people don't. I tend to avoid cars that are supremely popular for the sake of something else. That's pretty much an automotive hipster. But I enjoy being like that, because often you find hidden gems. This isn't one of them. This is just a car that I love the design of, and because I love the design of it so much, I can forgive everything else and still enjoy it. So that's why I said earlier on in this video that if you are not a huge fan of the design, you should definitely avoid it, because to be completely honest, of course, the design is the only good thing about the car. Everything else is bad or useless. And that's coming from someone who loves the design. So if you don't love the design, there is literally no purpose in buying this vehicle beyond just owning everything for the sake of it. So those are my thoughts on the Infiniti. It's kind of a strange car for me to review, because from a design standpoint, it's actually one of my favourite cars ever. Legitimately, this is one of my favourite car designs in history. Not just Vision GTs, but of any car, period. There are definitely some that I like more, but this is up there for me. So it's an awkward review to have a car that you love the look of so much, and yet you have to admit that it's awful. It's an unfortunate position to be in, but there you go. So those are my thoughts on the Infiniti. Very niched vehicle, one of the most niched cars in the game, in fact. But that's it overall. Of course, I will see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.